O'Rourke. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the campaign manager at 350 PDX. And yeah, we have a really great panel tonight. I'm really excited for this. Great speakers. But I want to make sure everyone is comfortable, so I hope you all got soup and bagels and tea and cookies. And again, but it's with prepared questions. So if you are listening to this tonight and you have some ideas and questions that come up, please jot them down and talk to us afterwards, or email any of the panelists or any of the organizers to continue the conversation. What else? Yeah, this event was made possible by all of these amazing co-sponsors. Yes, thank you. They're all listed in your beautiful program that Bonnie made, that Mac made. And in addition to this, thank you so much to the Multnomah Friends Meeting House for having us here. Perfect space. Make sure you talk to the organizations who have a table here. Get involved, put your name on their lists, that the work continues once we leave here. Excellent. Okay. So let's begin this evening with, let's offer an acknowledgement to the land that we're gathered on here and the land that we are referring to in this discussion tonight. Since time immemorial, and I want to pause with that word, immemorial, that means so far back that it extends beyond the reach of record or memory. Long time. The Willamette River was a rich and wild system of forest and wildlife, lakes and streams, where many tribes lived and fished and hunted and traveled and called home. The Multnomah, Cathlamet, Clackamas, Chinook, Tualatin and Kalapuya, Yakima are among some who lived along, near, or in tandem with this river network. We honor their care for this land and this river and acknowledge the deep scar of colonization that caused immeasurable harm to their people and the river. We acknowledge their continuing stewardship of these lands and hope to learn to work together to restore the river and this region. We acknowledge their continuing, that this is an ongoing journey, and we commit ourselves fully to it. I want to lift up a really important action to take related to this. I would love if everyone could visit chinookjustice.org, where when you're there you can learn about how the Chinook Nation, the federal recognition for their tribe was rescinded by the U.S. government about 20 years ago. And when you go to this website, you can send a message to your legislators, our U.S. senators and representatives, and sign a petition to make sure that their recognition is restored. This is really crucial because it means that they're unable to access really essential programs and resources. So please visit that. And thank you for being here and for taking this moment to think about the river. So I want to also briefly ground us in why we're here and talking about this issue. Is Jay Wilson here in the crowd? Oh, hi. Awesome. Jay put this video together. And Jay will be a panelist at our next Rumble on the River, January 17th, which you'll hear more about. But that beautiful network of streams and forests and wildlife that we were referring to just earlier about the Willamette River region, that's unrecognizable to us now. Now this is what we see, right? We see tank farms, what's called an industrial sanctuary, the critical energy infrastructure hub. And while for many of us, myself included, we only recently had our eyes opened to what was going on there because of Zenith Energy back in 2018 or 2019. But this has been an issue for a very, very long time. So much so that in 2000, the federal government designated this 10-mile stretch of area as a Superfund site. That's because of 100 years of industrial activity here has led to a myriad of toxic and carcinogenic chemicals released in the water and the soil, the fish. And this area, all of these tanks here, you can find the worst of the worst polluters there. Exxon, BP, Chevron, Shell, ConocoPhillips, Kinder Morgan, Northwest Natural. They're all neighbors with Zenith Energy. And as a lot of you know, and as we'll talk about tonight, one of the scariest parts about this is how, we're very long overdue for an earthquake on the Cascadian subduction zone. And there's, what you're seeing here is 90% of all of the liquid fuel in Oregon. So Zenith is one of the entities that we focus on, that we'll be talking a lot about tonight, but it's much bigger than just them, right? But we focus on Zenith partially because, they also are bringing in oil trains, and so they're putting all of the communities near the rail line at risk of explosion. So, but it doesn't have to be this way, right? It doesn't have to look like that. The river in that area spent much more time looking like forest and wetland and river and stream than it did looking like this. So we can go back to that, and that's why we're here tonight, and that's why we're learning this and committing ourselves to this work, because we want to imagine a better river. I think we're gonna get started, but as we start the panel and learn more about all of these topics, I want to acknowledge that all of the organizations here and who are represented on this panel tonight, we may not all necessarily agree with what exactly needs to happen with this massive issue that is the Critical Energy Infrastructure Hub. And that's great. That's the beauty of working together in a movement, because not all of us agree exactly on what we should do. So I like to think of movements as toolboxes. So if we're going to do a big project, we're going to need all the tools in our toolbox, but I might not like to use every single one of them, but someone else likes to use others, or I might not know how to use some of them. So that's a cool thing about working together in coalition. And just want to say that there's a lot of different things that we can do, and we may not all agree exactly, but we're still working towards this similar goal. Okay, and with that, I'm gonna turn it over to Micah. You can see Micah's bio in your program, but for the last 10 years, Micah's been involved with countless environmental campaigns along the Willamette River as part of the conservation team at Portland Audubon. I'll give it over to Micah. Under the table. Oh, he's got a pointer.
Yeah, first to the pointer, I'm borrowing this. It was up on the coat rack over there, but I need a pointer, so I will replace it after I'm done. Thank you, and I also want to apologize if I have a cough. It's been lingering for many weeks, not contagious, but it may interrupt my presentation briefly. I apologize. Thank you to Deneen for this introduction, and thank you all for being here. I am going to give a really quick summary of sort of the physical changes and ecological changes that have happened to the Willamette River over the last couple hundred years, specifically in Portland Harbor. And I want to reference two other really good resources to get a deeper dive into that history. One of which is the Oregon Historical Society has some really good resources on the history of the native tribes that have lived in this space, as Denise mentioned, since time immemorial, and a really great resource on their website. It's very easy to find. And then for a comprehensive accounting of all of the environmental campaigns and movements and community pressure from a diverse set of voices and organizations, Barbara Bernstein has done a really great documentary that is on the KBOO website called Once a Braided River, and that is a much more comprehensive history of this space. So I'm just going to be touching on this for like 5 to 7 minutes. So bear with me. So where we are, this is the city of Portland, circa 1852. And it is a place that, this map is very different than what we see today. Portland sat at the confluence of the Willamette and the Columbia, and a huge system of braided channels, wetlands, and other waterways, in which wildlife was abundant. It was one of the most biodiverse spaces in the entire Northwest at that time. And it still is very biodiverse, but we have lost a lot of that. And it was a very dynamic system in which channels moved from year to year, and there were lots of seasonal changes. And those seasonal changes were instrumental to the native populations that lived in this area, where from season to season there was such an abundance of different natural resources that they were able to steward and to use to survive. And upon colonization and genocidal actions, that was taken away from them, and this land was changed. So just a couple landmarks. So we've got from Blue Lake all the way to the confluence of the Willamette and the Columbia was a braided channel, which is now the Columbia Slough, but all of this was wetland area. The airport, this is Smith and Bybee Lake, which is still in existence today, but just paved completely around. You can see on the Willamette, we have Swan Island, which used to host a channel on either side, of which was altered for navigation's sake. And all along the stretch of the Willamette, there were hundreds of streams that came from the West Hills and made their way into the river, connecting habitat for salmon, providing clean, cold water, and really just being a connection for all sorts of wildlife. And then this area right here, which is the area we're going to be talking about today, the Northwest Industrial District. This was a lake system, Giles Lake, and wetlands that connected to the main channel. It was a very fluid area that was different from year to year, and was always full of teeming wildlife. And so yeah, we can go to the next page. So some of this type of habitat still exists today of what used to. This is Multnomah Channel on the west side of Sobey Island, where you can see there is vegetation, riparian areas up to the water. This channel still fluctuates from year to year, moving 50 to 100 feet in either direction. This is a good example of one of those free-flowing streams. This is Tryon Creek, the confluence at the southern tip of the city of Portland proper. And you can see how lush this service system is. And you can imagine a salmon being born upstream, hatching, making its way down here, then hanging out in the braided river system of Portland proper and the confluence for up to 2 or 3 years before going out to sea, where it will grow into an adult and then make its way back. We have such a small percentage of those streams still still navigable in the city of Portland. But we do still have a little bit of that. Like Crystal Springs has a salmon run in it right now, which is in the middle of southeast Portland, and it's a semblance of what we used to have, and it's a good example of what we could have more. So switch to the next one. This is the Columbia Slough and Smith and Bybee Lake. It's still fairly natural. Go to the next. So in the early 1900s, we really started changing the structure of the river. We have, this is the St. John's shipping port. This is downtown Portland, where wharfs were built out and buildings on top. And then this is Giles Lake, which, and this is still fairly wet and wild. Next. As the city decided, or as mostly industry decided to change the landscape, we separated the main channel from the connecting wetlands. So this is the Willamette, and this is Smith and Bybee Lake, disconnected now. This is Swan Island, where the channel used to be on this side. It has been switched to this side, and this eventually paved over. And this is St. John's, where we've hardened the banks and greatly affected the dynamics of the river. Next. And with those initial changes, we also placed industry in these places. This is in just north of St. John's, the shipyard to build ships for World War I and II, where this industry was vital for that effort, but also left a lasting impact, both in the changes to the landscape, but more importantly, the toxic residue that it left behind. This is Swan Island, very similar. And then, and this is Giles Lake, filled in and initially used for housing for a lot of these same workers. But eventually, as the capitalist structure shifted, it was completely destroyed, and industry was put on top of that. All liquefiable soil, which is mostly made up of rubble from construction projects. So we'll move on to the next one. Another industry that was very prevalent is the timber industry, where a lot of the toxic residue from this sort of industry is still in the river today. Next one. So, another 50 years down the road, some of those industries have been replaced by even worse industries in the same places without much hardening of the infrastructure. So we have the CEI Hub, where the fossil fuel industry has really taken hold. And you can see remnants of past industries that have just kind of remained in space, along with the toxic residue. Next slide. And that toxic residue is so bad that it has been designated a Superfund site, which is the worst of the worst. And there have been efforts to start to clean up that toxic sediment, and that's still underway, and there's still so much more to do. Go to the next one. You can see the other lasting scars of the way that we've structured the river. Go to the next one. And at the same time that we've placed the worst of the worst industries in this place and polluted them, industry has also been able to fight back against any sort of environmental protections. And so for most of the river, it is completely riverbank in this area. It's completely denuded of any sort of vegetation. And instead, there's pipelines, and there's ships, and there's rubble. And there are efforts underway, and there will continue to be efforts underway to rewild this space. But the existing conditions are pretty bad in lots of places. And I've got to wrap up. So just go through a couple more of these pictures. And yeah, and in addition to the environmental pollution, whether it's heavy metals or PCBs, there's also other types of pollutants, like light pollution, which is something that is just layered upon all of the other environmental injustices that communities along this river have felt for centuries. And so it is another piece of our collective effort to improve this space, to reduce stuff like this. And so yeah, we'll go to the next one. Just as we work to kick Zenith out of the space and deal with the CEI Hub, We also, at the same time, need to continue our efforts to rewild this space, and there are many community groups, including Portland Audubon, that have lots of different opportunities in the coming years to help in those spaces. So a great place to find those is on our website, and to help in those efforts, which is helpful for fighting demons as well.
Micah, that was great. Love those photos. Really helpful. Next on our panel, we have Commissioner Susheela Jayapal, Multnomah County, my commissioner. She serves as our District 2 Multnomah County Commissioner since January of 2019. She was born in India and came to the United States when she was 16 to go to college. Susheela is a lawyer whose last legal job was as a general counsel for DS America, and has also spent 2 decades as a volunteer community leader and advocate for a number of community-based organizations. Her priorities are housing and homelessness, economic justice, clean air, and climate resiliency. All right, Commissioner Jayapal.
Thank you so much, Janine. Thank you, Micah, for that presentation. I'm going to stand over there so that the light's not in my eye. Can you all see me if I'm over here?
Yes.
You know, I haven't seen the history presented that way before, and it really is so striking to think about what was and what is now, and to watch the evolution. And I imagine, I've lived in Portland for 28 years. I imagine that as that transformation was happening, people were watching pieces of it happen, and the cumulative impact just wasn't striking. And I think that happens in a lot of these issues, that things happen a little by little by little, and then one day we look up and go, what have we done? And I feel like that really illustrated that. So, as Denise said, I'm Susheela Jayapal. I use she, her pronouns. I am your Multnomah County Commissioner for District 2, which is, as we're orienting ourselves spatially, it's everything north of I-84. The western boundary of my district is the St. John's neighborhood, so across from the CEI Hub, essentially. And then it goes all the way out east to about 184th. So it's a long, skinny district at the top of our long, skinny county. I've been a commissioner. I'm just winding up my first term. I start a second term in January. I'll say that when I started in office, I ran because of housing and houselessness and displacement related issues, right? And I ran because of what I was seeing happening in my district, which used to be the center of Black community and Black life in Portland, home to lots of immigrants and refugees, home to Black and brown folks, low-income folks who've been displaced over the years. And I always talk about this because I want to remind people that although displacement has happened and continues to happen, that those folks, those communities are still in my district. They are still in North and Northeast Portland. And I do that because I think there's it's a narrative that we've seen with lots of marginalized groups of thinking that they're gone, and so we don't need to be concerned about this anymore. I mention this also because many of those neighborhoods, some of the most diverse neighborhoods in Portland, are across from the CEI Hub. Now, I'm going to confess something that I'm embarrassed about, which is I didn't know anything about the CEI Hub when I came into office. As I said, housing, homelessness, displacement, economic injustice, those were the things on my list. But my constituents came to me with their concerns. My constituents came to me and started talking to me about air quality, about industrial pollution, about wood smoke, about diesel pollution, and about these tank farms. And once you see them, it's like the eyes of the Mona Lisa, they follow you. You're just aware of their presence across the river, this looming presence. So as I started to learn about the CEI Hub and the risks that intuitively I think we know it poses, it sits on, as Micah said, on liquefiable soil. I partnered with my fellow commissioner, Commissioner Sharon Myron, who represents District 1, which is where the CEI Hub is, to commission a report. Now, there are many times in my life as an elected when I think to myself, why do we have to have a report? Why do we have to document it? Because we know, right? But we do have to. There is something about really analyzing the risks and the implications of these issues that makes things much more concrete and makes it much easier for us as policymakers, whether at the county level, the city level, the state level, federal level, to do something about the risks that we're articulating. So Commissioner Meyer and I partnered to fund a report on the CEI Hub that was completed in January of this year. And there are no surprises, and frankly, I said to someone as I came in, the folks in this room are probably more knowledgeable about this than I am. You have heard about this many times, so I don't think I'm going to tell you anything that you don't know. But as she pointed out, it is good to hear it over and over again. So, no surprises in this report. The consequences of Cascadia, when it happens, not if it happens, will be absolutely catastrophic. Those shifting soils will liquefy. The structures that sit on those soils will spread and buckle. There will be breaches of the tanks. Fuel will spill. The magnitude of the spill could be up to a couple of 100 million, I'm going to look at it so I get the gallons, thank you, gallons, the equivalent of Deepwater Horizon, the largest spill that we've ever seen in the country. The fuel will spread downriver as far as to the mouth of the Columbia. There could be explosions, there could be toxic fumes from those explosions, there could be fires that spread through, for example, Forest Park. Fish and wildlife will be harmed. The list of harms goes on and on. Now, the report also did try to estimate the monetized cost of this. And the monetized cost could be up to $2.6 billion. I emphasize monetized just to acknowledge that when we're talking about economic harms and property damage, we're not talking about loss of life, we're not talking about health harms, we're not talking about the impact of all of this on us as humans. We're just talking about the monetary cost, and that itself is catastrophic, right? So the report was published in January of 22, and I'm really pleased to say, and I want to say, I want to acknowledge again the role that constituents and that advocates like you played in lifting this issue up and prompting us to commission the report. I'm pleased to say that action was taken. Often reports happen and action is not taken. So the legislature in the 2022 session passed House Bill 1567, which is a bill that requires the owners of those tanks to make a seismic assessment and a risk assessment and to present risk mitigation plans to the legislature. This will be under the auspices of DEQ. DEQ is going to engage in rulemaking, and that process is going to go forward. So that was action at the state level. At the city level, not necessarily in response to this report, but really in response to all of the advocacy that you've been doing, I think most of you probably know that they have yet again amended their code to ban new bulk fossil fuel terminals. That was challenged twice by industry. City Council came back in October of this year, reimposed that ban. It has been challenged again, but that's action taken at the City Council level. We are going to incorporate that ban, so City Council code applies obviously in Portland, and Multnomah County has an agreement with the city whereby we adopt their codes in the unincorporated parts of Multnomah County. So there also will be no fossil fuel facilities in the unincorporated parts of Multnomah County. And then I'll mention one last thing, and this is something we are looking at. A follow-on from the report was an analysis of whether there are ways for the county in particular to develop kind of financial assurance mechanisms. In other words, to hold the owners of the tanks accountable in the event of this sort of an event. And those mechanisms could be insurance, they could be issuing risk bonds, there might be a variety of ways to do this. So we are looking at that, and the idea is, one, to get some financial mitigation from the owners of these tanks to hold them accountable, but also by creating that possibility that they would have to account for the financial costs, incentivizing them to actually mitigate the risk, because that's what we really want. It's not getting compensated for the damage that happens, it's preventing damage. So we're looking into that. There are other jurisdictions that have imposed those sorts of mechanisms, not in exactly these circumstances, but we're hoping similarly enough that it would give us a game plan for how we might be able to do it. And because we're seeing a picture of a fuel train, I'll just mention that one of the other things that caused me to be interested in this was the fuel trains, right? They crisscross, my district is like the focal point for those fuel trains. They run in every direction, east, west, north, south. They run through the Cully neighborhood, right through the residential area in my neighborhood. I think even harder is what I've been told by our lawyers, even harder to figure out how to deal with that. Railroads are notoriously difficult to deal with. But there's the potential that if we can find some of these mechanisms for the oil tanks, perhaps they would also apply to the fuel trains, and that could be something that we could do down the road. So that is a little bit about what the county has been doing. You know, the county is the local public health authority. This is everything I think we've learned lately is a public health issue. This is obviously a public health issue, and so that's one of the reasons why the county I feel that it's squarely within our authority and our mission to be grappling with some of these really hard issues. Last thing I'll say is the eventuality, I was going to say likelihood, but that is so the wrong word, the certainty of a Cascadia event. It's a really difficult thing, I think, for us as communities to grapple with and to plan for. Because as catastrophic as we know it's going to be, it's really hard to get our imaginations around it. And I think that's one of the things that prevents government from taking action on issues like that. And climate change is that issue writ large. But all of the work that you do, that the organizations represented here do, that the organizations on that screen do, to remind us over and over and over and over again that just because it seems unlikely, it is not unlikely, it is a certainty, and it's our responsibility to plan for it in any way that we can. So that is my bit. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I really want to elevate something you said earlier about how you vulnerably shared that you hadn't heard of the CEI Hub when you started office, which, you know, I only learned about it recently too, right? And you said you learned because of your constituents telling you. So that is a really helpful reminder for all of us when we're feeling like what we're doing doesn't matter. Oh my gosh, we're reaching out to all these elected officials and feel defeated, and that's fair, but it matters, right? That's why we have Commissioner Jayapal here tonight, and why we have the report and everything that came out of that. So remember that. Okay, next we are moving on to our next speaker. It's Nick Caleb. He's not listed on your program because he's pinch hitting tonight for our dear friend Audrey, who's sick. But Nick is awesome. He's a staff attorney at Breach Collective and has been doing awesome work in this field for a long time.
I'm going to try to awkwardly stand behind this table and see if that works. So when I was on my way over tonight to the forum and I got news that I'd be speaking tonight, I just started thinking about the last time I spoke in this kind of general area around climate-related issues, and it was just up the street at the Tabor Space about 5 years ago. It was the last time I spoke in this area, and it was maybe almost 6 years now. It was just at the beginning of 2017, and in my opinion, the kind of like recent climate movement was really hitting its apex. We were really strong. I remember going into a meeting and Ted Wheeler and Chloe Daly had just been elected, and they were sitting in front of an audience, probably some of you were there as well, and they were talking about how we're going to transition to 100% renewables. Ted Wheeler was surprisingly like good speaker that night, which, you know. And there was a lot of optimism. Months after that, we were able to convince Portland General Electric to not build out a bunch of gas-powered utilities to replace at Boardman, right? We were like really ascendant at that point. A year after that, we passed the Portland Clean Energy Fund. We finally had money to do climate justice in Portland. And when 2019 came around, we were really hitting our stride. So when Zenith came on the radar, we were prepared, we were ready, we knew what we were doing, we had everything going for us, and we started to organize around this oil terminal, which had come into existence by replacing an asphalt terminal. So if you'll recall, in 2019, Zenith kind of snuck under the radar. That's how it came to be. This company bought an asphalt terminal. Nobody voted on whether we wanted to have a new oil terminal at the Critical Energy Infrastructure Hub. There was no permitting process to decide whether we wanted to have a new oil terminal. They purchased an asphalt facility and changed it into an oil terminal using expired permits at the time. And people didn't like that. Understandably, we organized a lot of community forums, including one at the University of Portland that had many hundreds of people, city councilors, pledging to do whatever they possibly could on Zenith. We were making progress on it. Some of us who work in the legal field came up with what we thought was a theory to deny Zenith authorizations in the future in the form of what's called a land use compatibility statement, which I will call LUX for short. And basically that meant that when Zenith had to apply for its new Title V permit, they had to ask the city permission in order to continue their operations. They had to go to the city and say, we want you to tell Oregon Department of Environmental Quality that our facility complies with your land use rules. Nobody really uses that power in Oregon, but it exists, and it was an opportunity for our local government to hold a referendum on Zenith to do that public process that never happened at the beginning of the life of that facility. So we were making a lot of progress at that time, and then the pandemic hit. It's still with us, of course, but the sort of closure period of the pandemic really interrupted a lot of the progress that the climate movement had going up until that point. And I still don't think that we properly recovered from that. One other thing that happened is that we had several changeovers in our city council, and folks now are on the council that never really saw what the climate movement was like when we were fully mobilized. And so I don't think that they're properly scared of us, I have to say. And I think that's, just as a side note, I think that's something that we'll have to remind people of in the years to come here, because the way that decisions are being made right now in the city seems to me partially due to just a lack of that memory and seeing what we had to go to get to where we were. So coming out of the sort of like back into the front end of the pandemic, mid-2021, suddenly it becomes apparent that the city is about to make a decision on this land use compatibility statement. And honestly, until about 2 days before that decision was made, I was pretty sure that the city was going to affirm that oil terminal because they didn't want to take on the fight. But because we had organized so strongly and so deeply, and the county sent a letter to the city, 20 Oregon state legislators sent a letter to the city, there was a lot of press, people really organized around that, and Dan Ryan was up for re-election that same year. I think all of those things together weighed in favor of them making a decision to deny that land use compatibility statement. And it was a really amazing moment. It's very, very, very difficult to take action against an existing fossil fuel terminal. It's not something that happens very often. It's much easier to say no to something that doesn't exist, but unwinding something that already is in place and operating is very difficult. And so we basically we walked the city to the point where they could start to live their just transition values, right? That we would actually say no to a terminal, and we would start to unwind that infrastructure in the CEI Hub. The city was sued at the Land Use Board of Appeals, and we won the case. The city won the case with Columbia Riverkeeper and Willamette Riverkeeper intervening on behalf of the community. And what the Land Use Board of Appeals said, they said, yes, the city can use its comprehensive plan to say no to a land use compatibility statement, but you have to make more detailed findings. You basically have to give us more evidence that this facility would be out of compliance with your comprehensive plan. Great. There is a lot of evidence that Zenith is out of compliance with our comprehensive plan. And just a side note, those of us in the advocacy community have been telling the city to prepare those findings for about 2 years before that denial took place. Had they made those findings, had they listened to us, they would probably have just outright won that case. So, okay, I've got 1 minute left, so I'm gonna have to really move. So, after that, we have a couple of cases, or we have a case at the Oregon Court of Appeals. City wins again, affirms the lower court decision. Zenith appeals to the Supreme Court. Then something really bizarre happened. About 2 weeks before the Supreme Court ended up making its decision, City of Portland suddenly gets this proposal from Zenith to it says, we're gonna turn it into a renewable energy facility, and we're gonna promise to reduce all of our air emissions. And we gotta rush and make this deal with us. And the city just did it within 3 weeks, just basically turned around and granted authorizations to Zenith. And then 2 weeks later, wins at the Oregon Supreme Court, functionally giving up all of its leverage that it had over Zenith. It's a kind of mysterious timing, honestly. It strikes me as quite strange and bizarre, but you know, that it happened, and we were sort of left trying to figure out what was happening. So where we're at now is that it's not over. Under Oregon law, until the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality grants Zenith's new permit, the city can revoke this land use compatibility statement. And so we've demanded from the city that we want them to revoke that permit, we want them to hold a public hearing, and we want them to take evidence from the community about how this facility is out of compliance with our comprehensive plan. And that's a demand that we can continue to make until the Department of Environmental Quality grants that. So of course Zenith is like, hurry up, hurry up, hurry up, grant this permit. Dan Ryan is saying, hurry up, hurry up, hurry up, grants this permit, because they want it off their plate as fast as they possibly can. And it could happen, you know, after a few months here. So, you know, for us, I would say we have a few months here where if we're, I mean, great, we're going in Christmas time, of course, but we have a few months here where if we're able to rally, if we're able to really raise awareness on this, if we're really able to put pressure, if we're, Dan Ryan, when he made that decision, he probably thought he was going to have 4 years until he had to be up for re-election. Now he has 2 because we have a new system of government coming into place. And everybody on that city council has 2 more years as well. And so there's an opportunity that didn't quite exist just a few months ago for us to really put pressure on that council and tell them what we want. So that's my recommendation. We don't win in the climate movement because the law is on our side. We never have. There's no such thing as favorable climate law that exists. When we win, it's because we organize well, we organize strong, we don't take no for an answer, and we keep showing up. So let's keep doing it.
Amazing. Thank you, Nick. Yeah. We've been calling Dan Ryan Dan the oil train man. Who came up with that? Who came up with that? It's pretty good. That's his new name from now on. All right, we're halfway through our amazing panelists, so make sure we're not having any kind of intermission or anything. So whenever you need, just get tea and cookies. All right, next we have Patsy. Patsy Kohlberg is a retired primary care physician and former medical director of Multnomah County Health Department. She is active with Oregon Physicians for Social Responsibility, writes about climate, health, and related issues, and is a member of the Old Mole Variety Hour Collective at Cable Community Radio.
Great to see everybody here tonight. Thanks for coming out on a rainy night. I'm going to take a few minutes to talk about the tank farm as it pertains to your health. I have 5 basic points that I want to make tonight. The first is that there are hundreds of toxins that are present in those fuels that are stored at that site. A major accident would have a devastating effect on the public health. The day-to-day operations contribute to local diesel pollution, which is already a problem. Kind of a general point that the meeting EPA and DEA standards does not mean that there is absence of risk to your health. And in my professional opinion, activism is good for your health. So what's in those tanks? Refined petroleum, gasoline, diesel, motor oil, that kind of stuff. Crude oils, like what Zenith has been handling. Various gases, including LNG and other stuff like ethanol, ammonia, etc. So how do we get exposed to the toxins in these fuels? I think it's important to understand that The tank farm on a day-to-day basis is far from being one of the most polluting industries in the Portland metropolitan area. It is a storage and transport facility. So what we worry about there are, there's no refining going on there, there's no manufacturing. So what we worry about are these fugitive emissions that are part of normal operations that primarily occur when these substances are being transported, like from a tanker to a pipeline to a barge, and they escape into the environment during that transfer. This is all legal, it's all regulated, and it's pretty much confined to the site. I think the bigger problem that we have with the tank farm are the diesel emissions that are associated with this operation because of the trucks, trains, and barge traffic that is bringing this stuff to and from the site. Also part of normal operations, but is polluting all over the metro area. And this is all legal too, but it's not as well regulated. And it's an environmental justice issue because the communities that are most at risk and most exposed to this diesel pollution are BIPOC and low-income communities. This is what we really worry about, is these accidental emissions from not just earthquake, but from leaks and spills, fires, explosions, collisions, derailments, floods. These things all happen. And then the big one, the earthquake. And all of these events have potential for massive and severe environmental contamination that would potentially affect tens of thousands of people in the metro area with disastrous health consequences. And these events, by their very nature, are unpredictable and difficult to prepare for. This is Mojo. So what are the chemicals that we might be exposed to? There are the criterion air pollutants. I've listed them there. These are relatively well monitored, regulated, measured by EPA and DEQ. But then there are these other almost 200 chemicals that are designated as hazardous to your health by the EPA. Of course, all the criterion air pollutants have known health effects. This includes heavy metals, PCBs, dioxin, a whole bunch of really nasty stuff is included in these various fuels that are housed there. So what are the potential effects on health? Well, to be honest with you, they're just legion, and I can't even begin to describe the ways that our health can be harmed. In the event of an accident, of course, there can be accidental death and injury, but these chemicals create a whole wide variety of acute and chronic conditions, including reproductive and developmental health issues. This stuff is really bad for pregnant women and babies. They cause cancer, they can wreck our mental health and cognition, cause premature death. And workers, of course, are the people who are absolutely the most vulnerable to these chemicals, but also there are a whole number, I'm not going to read the list, of people who disproportionately suffer when they're exposed to these chemicals. This is a slide just to show you the relative size of a particulate matter, and I want to spend just a minute or two on particulate matter as a key pollutant. We can have our next slide. What is it and why do we care about it? It's because it's the principal component of fossil fuel and diesel pollution, which is estimated to cause 20% of all deaths worldwide on an annual basis. 20% of all deaths worldwide annually. These are very tiny solid and liquid particles formed by incomplete combustion that include a whole broad range of toxic substances that have adverse effects on basically any bodily system that you want to name. And they cause cancer, And most tragically, the particulate matter is closely related to the epidemic of asthma in kids that particularly affects BIPOC and low-income communities. This slide is just to point out that whether the emissions are from normal operations or because of an accident, they get into everything. Once they're out there in the air, they get into everything. They get into our soil, they get into our groundwater, our lakes and rivers and streams, they get into the wildlife, they get into domestic animals, they get into the plant life. And some of these are forever chemicals, and once they get into the environment, they're going to be there for sometimes hundreds of years. And then from there, they get into us because we breathe them in, we absorb them on our skin from the soil, we breathe in the dust, we eat the plants and animals, we drink the contaminated groundwater. Once these chemicals get into the environment, avoiding human exposure gets very, very difficult. That's why we don't want them there in the first place. I'm going to skip over most of the stuff on this slide because I'm probably almost out of time. But I just want to say that the environmental regulations, EPA, DEQ, are really not adequate to protect us. And I want to just emphasize this point, which is that some pollutants, and this includes your particulate matter, have no safe levels of exposure. The agencies might want you to think otherwise, but they simply don't have a safe level of exposure. So in summary, accidental spills could have disastrous consequences for public health. Normal operations are contributing to very unhealthy levels of local diesel pollution, which is worse here in Portland than in the majority of the other big urban areas in the country. Current environmental regulations are not necessarily protective, and resistance counts, and it starts with being aware. Thank you very much for coming out tonight.
To know so useful in all of our campaigns, so helpful to have a health perspective. It's a big reason why we've been so successful to be able to share how this is impacting public health. Our next speaker is Charisse Bach, leads Oregon Interfaith Power and Light through Ecumenical Ministries of Oregon. She also teaches in the theology department at University of Portland and holds a Master of Divinity from Princeton Theological Seminary and a Master of Science in Environmental Studies from Antioch University, New England. Give it up for Charisse.
Hello everyone, good evening. It's good to be with you all. I think I want to just take a moment and see if we can just start with taking a few deep breaths and just pay attention to your body. What are you feeling in your body right now after hearing these presentations? And I know I'm feeling kind of a mixture of emotions. I'm feeling some anxiety for the things that are going on, some anger, some grief, as well as some hope. So just take a few breaths in and out to notice where in your body you're feeling those things or other things. So I feel it can be helpful to recognize how we're feeling, the emotions, the sensations that we're feeling, connect with the planet that our feet are grounded on, the air that we're breathing, the people around us that form our community, and feel those feelings together. So I wonder if a few people would just shout out one word of one of those feelings that you noticed in yourself. Grief and rage.
Hope.
Hope.
Fear.
Fear.
Power.
Power.
Energize.
Energize.
Determined.
Determined. Thank you. I think it can give us some hope even when we're feeling rage and anger and fear, to also feel the power and the hope and the joy that comes with coming together as a community who cares about these things, and to know that we're not alone in this work. So, as the name said, I work for Ecumenical Ministries of Oregon, leading Oregon Interfaith Power and Light, and so I was asked to kind of share a few things that the faith community brings to the environmental movement, as well as ways that I think that that the faith community could help out in this work if asked, and if we get clued into some of the things that are being done. So, full disclosure, you all have probably done a lot more on this particular Zenith project than I have, but people of faith have been involved in this all along. I started in this role in 2020, right as the pandemic was beginning, and have kind of been involved in the edges of this Zenith movement, but I wanted to give a little bit of information about what we're doing at Ecumenical Ministries of Oregon and Oregon Interfaith Power and Light, as well as ways that I think people of faith can be involved in environmental work. So, so first of all, I started working on climate work because I'm a Quaker. I don't go to this particular meeting, but love this meeting. But we're a group that is that cares about social justice stuff, right? And so as I was kind of considering what is my particular work, I recognized the connection between social justice and environmental issues, and that was kind of what drew me in. And I think for a lot of people of faith, that's the connection point, is the social justice aspect, caring about our neighbors, caring about our communities, and then recognizing the community of all life that we're participating in. And at Ecumenical Ministries of Oregon, we do quite a bit that is advocacy related. So right now we're working a lot on the Divest Oregon campaign with 350 and other people, and we're working on a climate resilience bill with the Oregon Just Transition Alliance and Unite and some other groups. So, so we're really involved in quite a bit of advocacy right now. I think that faith communities can be a great unit for organizing, because they're already these communities that are grouped together and know each other and do work together. And so, so they can be a great unit for saying, hey, we'd like you to speak up on this issue, and they can find a couple of people to show up to a legislator meeting or write a public comment. And so that can be, I think, helpful as for this movement, for other movements that you're involved in related to the environment, to reach out to faith communities in your neighborhood and see if they'd like to make a public comment or show up. And I think that one of the other things that I was really drawn to as a person of faith is knowing that, you know, people of faith have been involved in all these social justice actions in the past, the civil rights movement and women's right to vote and stuff, and being involved in civil disobedience and nonviolent direct action. And so that's a way that some people of faith are willing to show up and be involved. It can be powerful to have a clergy member show up in their clergy garb. Quakers aren't so good at that, but clergy of other traditions, and willing to show up and bring the spiritual grounding to that moment, and also you know, that kind of movement organizing that has been part of faith traditions in the past and hopefully into the future. And so that's something that we've done. We helped organize people to get to the Line 3 action last summer, and have been involved in other related actions. And so, so I think that also, got 1 minute left, so what else is particularly important? But I think that it's really helpful for the movement to have the hopefully the spiritual grounding that can come with the faith community, but at the same time recognizing, particularly for those who come from the Christian tradition, the harm that has been done by Christians. And so that's a lot of the work that Christians are doing right now, that I'm doing with Christian communities, is to say, we've done a lot of damage here. This has been done in the name of Christianity. And so what's the harm in the harm reduction and the healing work that we can participate in to recover from that? And so like this last weekend, I led something called the Rivers Lament that was put together by Eco Faith Recovery, which has a table right over there if you want to look at it, and really recognizing the role that Christians have played in the harm and being part of that process of healing. So that's, I think, what people of faith can bring to the movement, and welcome to ask us any questions and invite us along on all of your actions.
Cherise, for all of that, and for giving us a moment to be still and reflect on how we're feeling, what this is bringing up for us. We have one more panelist, and then we're going to have, I know maybe these moments have all felt short, and it's because we want to have ample time for a conversational Q&A. So you'll get to hear from all these lovely people more, don't worry. Next we have Isabel. Isabel is an environmental journalist and climate activist born and raised in Southern Oregon. Their work covering ecology, climate, conservation has appeared in Sierra Magazine, Scientific American, Atmos Magazine, and the New York Times. Through their work, they aim to help people envision a creative way forward on a changing but very much worth saving planet.
Thank you so much. Oh, is this on? Thank you so much for having me here tonight. Bonnie first reached out to me after the Portland City Charter hearing a couple weeks back. Little did she know that that was actually my first time participating in any kind of activism in Portland. For years as an environmental journalist, I've kind of held back from activism, maybe 50% because it's somewhat frowned upon in kind of the old guard journalism communities. And honestly, partly because I felt a sense of like paralysis or like hopelessness about climate change, especially just being immersed in the science of it and speaking to the communities harmed by it, throughout my entire work week. And then what really brought me into it just this summer was hope and the decision to decide to actively approach the future with a sense of hope. So just a little bit about my background. I like to say that the Klamath-Siskiyou Mountains raised me. I grew up catching woolly bear caterpillars and frogs and chasing grasshoppers and picking wild chives in the meadows and lakes in the Klamath-Siskiyou Mountains in Southern Oregon and Northern California. And that really informed my ethic as an adult towards the environment. But it's also made the past 20 years all the more painful. I'm 27 years old, and there's a lake that I've been to, or I went to, basically every weekend throughout the summers as a child, and I've seen the meadows retreat, and there aren't any wild chives anymore, and I don't really see that many grasshoppers. A lot of the wildflowers that I used to encounter are more rare now. I don't see as many frogs. The loss of biodiversity is stunning, and it's easy to feel despair in the face of that. But I also feel really excited looking forward. I think that we live in a really interesting time. And I think that I try and gain some perspective actually looking backwards. So I imagine 50 years ago, early queer activists, what they would think looking forward to me and my life today. What would they think if someone told them, hey, this person in the future just like called up their mom and was like, hey, I'm not actually a woman. And my mom was like, cool, That's normal. Or like I can walk around, the fact that I can just walk around Target with my girlfriend holding hands and like looking at pillows. And that's also just a normal thing. Might they have hoped for that? Sure. Would they have thought that was possible? Maybe not. I definitely don't think they could have imagined the fact that young people would be organizing around queer justice, environmental justice, gun control, on an invisible network of electrons called the internet. So I think that looking forward, we need to be aware that while there are these scary known unknowns, like the climate projections we see under business as usual scenarios with fossil fuel emissions, we also have to recognize that there are unknown unknowns and that can be really hopeful. Recently I read a book called Hope in the Dark by Rebecca Solnit, which I very much recommend. And when I picked it up, I initially thought, okay, I really need to read this book. This feels like very gloomy times right now. And I realized that what she actually means by dark is not like gloomy or terrible, but just unfathomable. So there's a lot in the future that we cannot fathom, and that can be, that doesn't have to be scary. That can be positive because there are injustices happening now that we can't really imagine being righted in the future because they are the status quo. And so looking forward, I like to think about what injustices have yet to be righted, what positive transformations are impossible to imagine now.
What a great panel we have. Everyone's so awesome. I'm gonna talk a bit about how you can put this new information into action. And then we're gonna come back and have a Q&A and get to hear more from our panelists. Is anyone in this photo? Yeah, this is fun. These are so cool. We did this at the climate strike in 2019 when there were 20,000 people.
Wow.
That's a lot of people. Marched in Portland. We should do this again. It's a fun thing to do. This is a Venn diagram we love to use at 350 PDX. Has anyone seen something like this before? This was written by Dr. Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson. She's a really great climate scientist and author. And just when we start thinking about what is our role to play in this work, and when we start talking about ways to get involved and take action, there really is a specific role for everyone, and that role, even for yourself, can change over time. And so we like to think a lot about what is the intersection of what brings you joy, what you're good at, and what work needs to be done. So we heard a lot about what work needs to be done. So just reflect, and now and when you go home, and think about what you're good at and what brings you joy, and there is something that's that perfect fit. And maybe you've already found it, or maybe maybe it's changing in this moment. I think it's always like a fluctuating feeling of really feeling like that place. I think the pandemic has also made us like rethink what we like to do and what brings us joy, and so it's worth re-reflecting on as we think about taking action. The most important thing I want to make sure everyone does is that you signed in when you came in, because that means that you will get notified about all of the things I'm going to talk about after this, so you can just tune me out if you signed up. If you haven't yet, find Bonnie. That's Bonnie, and sign up. And that's where you can also learn about our next upcoming Rumble on the River. There's also a link here to sign a petition from Columbia Riverkeeper about Zenith and getting the city to rescind the Lux, as we've talked about. There's postcards back there that we will be sending in bulk to Dan, the oil train man. And then also talk about what you learned with people in your life who may not be involved, and bring them to the next Rumble on the River, especially if they haven't come to something like this before, 'cause this event is for them. So, who's coming next Wednesday to City Hall? Yeah. There's going to be a really fun rally and testimony delivery at the City Hall hearing on Wednesday morning, all about this, holding Dan, Ryan, and the whole council accountable and demanding that they rescind the Lux, because as we heard, that is something they can do, and we are waiting on that to happen, and it needs to happen now, and we also need to have a formal public hearing, because as we heard, there was not community engagement before that decision was made, which was really, really, really wrong. So please join us at 9 a.m. on Wednesday at City Hall. And then on January 17th is our next Rumble on the River, and it's going to be at Havara in Northwest. Thank you to those folks for hosting us. And then we also have a February Rumble on the River in the works that will likely be in the St. John's neighborhood. And we really believe in this public education community forum series as a way to get more people involved, and we're doing them in different parts of the city so we reach more people. We did this back in 2019 about Zenith, and it was really successful. So please help us continue making it be successful by bringing new people to these events. Also, we're going to have some fun caroling events next Thursday, and then the following Tuesday. We will be caroling with hot cocoa. We'll be in the Overlook neighborhood, which is pretty close to Zenith, and it's in the blast zone. And we will be singing songs that are about Zenith and about the CEI Hub, like this one on the screen. Like one of these verses. He rules the world with backdoor deals. Dan, the oil train man. It's fun, and there's like many more. Josie from Breach Collective is writing a bunch of them. If you have any that come to mind, write it and bring it to us, and we'll sing it together. So that's going to be really fun, and we're going to pick an exact address, so make sure you sign up, and you will get notified about that too. What else? Okay, I'm going to leave this on the screen for a while, so that everyone can leave having added all of these people in your phone as contacts if you haven't yet. It should be like, Aunt Sue and then like Ted Wheeler on your phone. Like you just like they're a contact on your phone, so you can call them whenever and annoy them about this every day. It matters. Okay, so we're gonna go into Q&A, but I'm gonna actually leave that on. I feel like I missed something. Jan, not to call you out. Do you have something you wanted me to say? This Saturday at Lloyd Center?
Oh yeah, if you like the flash mob, we have a wonderful Riverkeeper helped us write the lyrics to a great song to stop Zenith, and we're going to go meet at Lloyd Center in front of the Greater River campaign exhibit. It's on the bottom floor of Lloyd Center on the west end where Nordstrom used to be. We're going to meet over there. We're going to practice the flash mob, and then just spend like 45 minutes going around Lloyd Center doing our Zenith flash mob and handing out information. So it should be fun. It's just another way to get involved.
Love it. Thank you, Jan. Flash mob on Saturday at Lloyd Center. Okay, after we do a little bit of Q&A, we're going to close this out with a song that we're going to sing together. That's that's going to be sung on Wednesday at City Hall. So stick around for that. Let's see. This question, all of these questions can be for anyone on the panel, and multiple people can answer. It can be a conversation. The first one I'm going to choose, I think, is so the seismic and climate threats from the CEI Hub seem really immense. So how can we begin to mobilize our community to demand serious action and solutions about this? Anyone want to start?
So when I think about the critical energy infrastructure hub, and I think about the history of the area like Micah talked about earlier, it strikes me first that this is not that old. Like, this is not, you know, stuff that's been around for millennia or something like that, right? This is in recent human history that everything has been constructed in the critical energy infrastructure hub. It stands to reason that it could be unconstructed in a similar time period, if not much more rapidly if we wanted to do it. Maybe even more rapidly with current technology. I like to start from the position that, again, the law poses barriers for us, and we should just ignore that, basically, as a starting point. We should just be like, okay, like, yeah, of course, like, there's industrial protections that exist under state law. Yeah, there's industrial sanctuaries. It's like, guess who wrote the law, right? Like, of course there are. But we live here, and this is our community, and our children are going to live here probably for a lot longer too. And if we take democracy seriously, and if we take community action seriously, like, we should get to decide what are in those areas. And so skip past like what's possible tomorrow and start imagining what you would want that area to look like, right? It's a beautiful area right behind it with Forest Park. It used to be a beautiful area before that. It served all sorts of ecological functions and tribal needs. Why couldn't it be something similar? Why couldn't we build green, affordable, or public housing on the riverfront? Why couldn't we redeed or rededicate that land to tribal interests? Like, there are many, many things that we could do, and so we should just start talking about it and coming up with those visions and making art and song and culture around those types of projects. And then once we set a direction together, then we fill in the gaps along the way. Then we have the fights that we need to have. We win the battles in court or in the legislature, or wherever we have to go in order to get there. We piece that together. But that, honestly, to me, it all comes secondarily. So part of this work, I would say I'm not religious. I've never been religious. I've been in and around it in a lot of my life. But I enter the climate movement from a position of faith. Like, I guess, you know, that's the only way I can talk about it, is like, we have to think beyond the sort of horizons of what's possible in the immediate moment and to where we want to go. And then we put our head together forward and we just do it. We just like charge through the stop signs and make it happen. So that's my kind of like way that I like to think about it and where we could go.
Yes to that. Sign me up. In addition, I think there are like some tangible, smaller projects that are starting to reclaim the river in this stretch. Not so much on the west side where CEI Hub is like entrenched, but across the river at Willamette Cove, the Portland Harbor Community Coalition and lots of partners have really been able to move Metro, which is a regional government, around reclaiming Willamette Cove for community. And it's this beautiful natural area that has persisted in the middle of hell for the most part around it. And it is Metro, because of the people power of that coalition and you all, Metro is now going to be cleaning that up entirely, removing all of the toxic material and repurposing that as a natural area and a park for community to vision. Wow. So that's one little pocket. There are other pockets, like Eagle Park, just north of it. I just lost the name of the little community that's just north of Eagle Park. Green Anchors. Yes, Green Anchors is another place where community is like reclaiming that space for access, for prosperity, for housing, and we keep thinking about these little pockets while toppling the big system at the same time.
Let's see. What do you all do, panelists, to sustain your own motivation and inspiration to act?
I think that, first of all, being in community spaces like this is the most important part for me. I think that part of what created a lot of despair for me before getting involved in the activist movement was being siloed. I also think that continuing to go back and read literature written by activists in the past, it has been really important for me to kind of maintain that long view and recognize how incremental progress has been and yet how far we've managed to come, and also how activists that we kind of revere and look back at with nostalgia also faced massive obstacles and at times felt like stagnated.
Such a great question. It's funny, Caleb, you said something that I've often said in almost identical words, which is I'm not a person of faith, in religious faith, but I am a person of faith in the power of people to achieve things that are unimaginable. And so when I am feeling my darkest, I think about things that were unimaginable at the time. I think about the fact that my daughter celebrated her queer wedding this July. That was unimaginable, even 15, 20 years ago. You know, I think about as much as racial injustice exists, there are ways in which communities of color, black and brown folks, are seizing power that we wouldn't have imagined 20 years ago. So that's it. I think it's a variation of things others have said. And then I read literature. I have tried to carve out time. I was a bookworm back in the day when that was the word that you used. I'm not sure if people use it anymore. I lived to read, and then frankly, since I've started this job, I have fallen out of the habit. And in the past month, I've just tried to compel myself to read literature. I read a lot. I mean, I read a lot of political stuff. I read newspapers, all that. But I've started to require myself to read literature. Octavia Butler, science fiction, which I never read as a kid. But I really am finding that inspires me and regenerates me and creates creativity in a way that my day job doesn't always. So those are some of the things that I do.
Yeah, I love that. Reading fiction is so rejuvenating, and you can cast that vision that you're talking about too, of like casting a picture that we can't otherwise. For me, one of the things, in addition to some of the things you all have said, is really learning this land and the seasons that are here, and so trying to do things that reflect the season that we're in, connect with the rest of the natural world in whatever season, and learn how to be from this place. So that's something that really connects me and reminds me of why I'm doing this work. And for those who do come from a religious tradition, it can be really helpful to use the things that are part of your religious calendar to connect with the land during those religious holidays. And so one of the things that has been meaningful to a lot of Christians, again, not so much to Quakers, but I work with the people from more liturgical traditions, is the season of Lent, where you kind of give up something. And so giving up something during that season, a lot of people have found it meaningful to give up single-use plastic, or driving places that they can walk, or things like that. So connecting with the seasonal rhythm of your faith community or other communities that you're a part of, that's been really meaningful to me, to kind of practice that in a way that connects with the land in the place here and the community of all life in this place as well.
fun and play and being silly are things that sustain me, and I think bringing those into like otherwise kind of serious environments is really good. So, you know, for example, like, it's inherently absurd to me that Dan Ryan would like side with an oil company over a community, right? Like to pick the side, like you could just be immensely popular and just to like run away from an important decision. Like, to me, it angers me on one hand. I also think it's just absurd. It's like, and so I think we should play with that. I think it's really funny. I think when we like hit that we're strong and we're fun, when we hit like the right tone, that's what makes people want to join us too. That's why I always loved the climate movement in Portland, because we were fun and we like took it up to a level, and then we knew how to like carry and stay at that level in a way that was like still fun. Press would still want to write about it and invite people in, and so I don't know. I feel like we're kind of on that precipice again, where like the last 2 years have been really hard, and we've been kind of alone and isolated, and now we're coming out of that. And so, yeah, I would just encourage people to like explore just fun ridiculousness.
I love it that people brought up reading fiction, because I'm also a great fan of reading fiction as a way to get perspective, you know, on what's happening. And some people who know me in the room may have heard me say this before, that you shouldn't trust a doctor who does not read novels. Yeah, I'm serious about that, actually. But the only other thing, a couple other things I would add to that I think are really important to me. One is getting out into the wilderness on a regular basis for refreshment. And the other is just pacing and self-care, and just not taking on more than I can bear, or, you know, just kind of plugging along and doing it.
Well, because that question was so lovely, and because we're kind of at a close here, we're going to stop there. And if you have more burning questions, just hang on to them. There will be more time. But we're going to close by singing a song together. That's one of my things I like to do to stay rejuvenated in this work. Okay, who was maybe said like 3 years ago in the State House in Salem, when we occupied the governor's office, and we sang a song through the whole building, and it echoed, and it gave me chills, and it was beautiful. We're gonna sing that song. I remember it. And that also, come on, that campaign, Jordan Cove, man, that's an example. You know, we've been fighting Zenith for about 4 years. It took 20 years. Jordan Cove and completely won. Not to say that's going to happen here, but you know, we didn't give up, and that was the key. And that's the kind of people we all are, right? We're not going to give up. We're not going to give up because we've got the power. So it goes like this, and then join in with me after I do this one verse. And
stand up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you for saying that. Oh yeah. And you know, singing is like more of a thing with your air molecules than talking. So maybe if you're not already, you might want to wear a mask. I'm not going to, because then you won't be able to see me. Okay. It goes. We have got the power. We have got the power. We have got the power. It's in the hands of us all. Try it out. We have got the power. We have got the power. We're going to be singing that on Wednesday, so practice it on your way home.